So it's early evening for me. I live in Bangalore, and so welcome to each of you to this workshop. And my topic is the personal is political. Yeah. And this workshop is really to explore how politics has impacted us, and maybe through the years of our lives. So this workshop is really about that. And I'm going to be beginning with a little, introduction about myself to tell you where I am. Yeah. There's one more person who's joined. Yeah. So I will bring in people as they come in, but I can't keep you all waiting. Yeah. So I was very greatly interested in this topic because, as you heard this morning from the keynote address, India has gone through partition, and we are still living with the impact of partition on us. And in our current situation, we have turned nationalist because we haven't resolved the issues of partition. Okay? And so when I heard this morning the keynote address, we still haven't resolved it. And we keep bringing it up from time to time. And this has impacted a social, psychological, human divide in our own country. So I will just begin with, and then we will just spend a little time with each of you, actually sharing a little about your political environment, so that all of us get a sense of who we are and who, and understand as we begin speaking, because this is exploratory, experiential, and I'm going to be asking you some questions to work on. So as you speak, we will get an understanding about the frame of reference you are referring from. Okay. So our personal experiences are shaped by our existing political systems. Those systems that embody patriarchy, oppression, democracy, monarchy. The individual is able to relate to these personal experiences and to their political structures. These structures then become a culture of norms, values, beliefs in the parent ego state. Our personal day-to-day experiences are rooted from our early political structures. Example, relationships, parenting, gender, autonomy, etc. This workshop is to explore what political means for you today and to locate its personal meaning aligning with your political system. We are going to be exploring the deeper layers of political experiences or thinking to perceive and evaluate information we have absorbed from early rooted structures. So let's just look at this little, this little quote I have. If you spoke of your personal experiences, you discovered it was shared. If it was shared, it was social. And if it was social, it was political. And if it was political, you could do something about it. By Peggy Dobbins, right? So maybe we'll just spend a little time this morning just talking about a little about your thoughts on your political system. So we would just spend a little time, maybe 2 minutes, each person could have, talking about their political system. Yeah. Yeah. So who would like to begin? And so that we get an understanding. Maybe I will call out Catherine. Just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so I come from parenting where my mother was very active politically in the 70s. And on my father's side, I come from Irish stock that then came across to England and possibly experienced some oppression. But my paternal grandfather became, after the war, became a journalist and actually ended up founding the Sunday Telegraph. So his integration in terms of the establishment is quite an interesting journey in and of itself. And then there's a bit of an echo because my grandfather, at the height of his career, he was the editor of the sort of world affairs desk at the Sunday Telegraph. And he was based in Singapore and Indonesia, where he had also fought in the war as a Nepalese Gurkha. There is an interesting gap in my family history. We don't know how he ended up moving out of the Irish Army into the Nepalese Gurkhas. There are various myths about how and why that happened. But I suppose the interesting leap for my own political identity is that as a child, I became an expat in Singapore and I did all of my schooling as an expat. And so went from being a typical young girl in my environment to being quite other and to being brought into contact with people who had very different values and different language and different culture. And it was an exciting interchange. But I think by the time I came back to the UK at university, I felt I really resonated with the idea of being a third culture kid, that home was a concept rather than a lived experience for me.
Hey,
and
thank you.
I suppose to sum up the quote that I would say is my headline would be a bad paraphrase of Theodore Adorno, which would be the most moral position is to be not at home when you are at home. And that sums up, I think, where I got to. Sorry, I spoke too long there.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm not really sure where I sit. I mean, this is why I was signed up for the workshop, because so this is something that I'm sort of just starting to feel into. But I live in Liverpool in the UK, and Liverpool it's a big sort of seaport. That's its entire history. It's built on the sea, on maritime trade. And as such, it's got sort of a very mixed culture, huge sort of influences from all over the world, people from all over the world. And that's still very true today. And I think there's very much is kind of this sense for a lot of people in Liverpool, a lot of natives of Liverpool, that we don't really fit into the culture in the UK. There's this, just to give you a very simple example of that, football is obviously a very huge sport in the UK, and Liverpool is a very strong football city. But Liverpool fans don't follow the England squad for the simple reason that we have this sense of separation. But a real affinity between, for example, Liverpool and Glasgow in Scotland, because Glasgow has that same maritime heritage, that same global influence. So I guess politically, Liverpool and Glasgow, for example, well, certainly Liverpool has a very strong sort of almost radical political culture. So Margaret Thatcher did that whole attempted the managed decline in the 80s. So there's this sort of real sense of otherness and separation from the rest of the country in a political and sort of moral sort of sense. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with all of this. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Karen, would you like to go next? Yeah.
Thank you. I live in Brighton, which is the whitest place I've ever lived, and kind of liberal in some ways. My mother is German, so grew up in Nazi Germany, and my father is English, and they're both quite conservative and sort of conformist. but I grew up actually in Malaysia for the first part of my life. So I was an expat kid and I thought that was home, although I didn't speak Malay, although my parents did. So, and then I was sent to boarding school in England. So then I had the whole boarding school culture. And then my parents moved to Nigeria. So in the holidays, I had an experience of being very much the other, feeling like, oh my God, my white face is very apparent in Nigeria. And also my parents spent some time in India. So I spent some time after university traveling around India. So I think my identity is quite confused. I think even when I arrived in boarding school, I fundamentally didn't like the values. And my therapeutic work now is very much specializing in working with ex-boarders, and it's trying to sort of unpick this colonialist, misogynist, patriarchal, I'm trying to undo that in myself, and I'm trying to undo that in my work with clients. And I very much identify with Catherine's idea of like, well, where's home? What is home?
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Sam, hello, Sam.
Morning, everyone. Wow, it's a big question, isn't it? What
Yes.
political means to me. So my parents came over from Dominica in the 60s, and I was born in the UK. And when I just even think about the word politics, I mean, I can remember Margaret Thatcher. There was just lots of talk about different people representing some people, but not necessarily representing me or my culture. And if anything, it's an evolving topic when I think about politics, because growing up, we were told not to engage with it. But I'm aware that oppression is politics. The work that we do with our clients, there's a political theme that goes through why people do come into therapy. So yeah, that's where I am right now with just, what politics means for me. It's just an evolving process.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Hi, everybody. So I come from, on my father's side, a mother who was my grandmother, who was a white South African. I later discovered that she was not a white South African. She was a South African who was not assigned an ethnicity because she was neither black or white. But it was very important to be white in South Africa in her day. And of course, later on, that led to the whole apartheid thing in South Africa. So I was brought up by her. And I often sit with the culture shock of my grandmother and her hanging on to being white like her life depended on it. So that's one side. And she came out of South Africa on the first postal boat that left South Africa after the First World War. So I often think about her landing at Portsmouth on a grey November rainy day and looking around her and thinking, what have I done? What have I done? So that's one strong influence. And then the other is from poverty in the UK. So my great-grandmother died in a poorhouse. And my mother moved from place to place.
Okay, all right.
Well, I think something's happened here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody's,
Back again.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
It's a
Thank you.
confusion.
Yeah.
And it's a sense of white is not white. Black is not black.
And brown is not brown.
And brown is not brown.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jackie, would you like to go next? Yeah. You're on mute. Hello, you're on mute. Okay, all right, okay. Would you like to take off your earphones and then speak? No?
I think she's
All
put
right.
something in the chat. Shall I read it
Okay,
out,
put
Jackie?
something on
She put
chat.
it in the
Okay.
chat.
Okay, is this what Jackie has written? I left school in the 90s. I have come to be interested in politics through studying women's studies degree and feminist literature. Okay, thank you. All right. Helen?
Hi. Right. I think my my early years were in a working class family. I think my dad was Labour, but I'm not sure. My mum was always middle of the road. And then after my dad died, she remarried a man who was pretty right wing. And some of my politics are mixed up with Christianity because they were all Christian, but didn't really behave like what I thought Christians should behave like, which is certainly not right wing. As I've always been left wing myself, really, my family was racist. I've been, as I've rebelled against that all my life, really. As I've got older, I've become more feminist and more radical. I think I'm going to be an activist when I retire, which won't be long now. And I think my politics are caught up in the injustice of the world and this country. I live in a right-wing town, which voted for Brexit. So I don't quite fit here, but I don't really want to live anywhere else either. Yeah. And all my politics are rooted in injustice, I think. Yeah, so that's where I am.
Okay, thank you. Right. Romy?
Hi, I'm German, living in the UK. So my parents were both German, living in East Germany. I was born and raised there until I was about 10, and that's when the wall came down. My mum was very politically active against the regime, and we were considering leaving the country before the wall came down, and I'm really glad to see that that didn't happen. In my history, I traced back several generations, certainly the last 4 generations of at least one, if not several people in the family leaving their home country and moving abroad. And I did that when I was 18, and then when I was 20, I moved to the UK. And I live in Manchester, which was very welcoming at the time. That's me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Paolo, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. For me, the political is, as I see myself, perhaps more part of the white majority, if you like. It's a more subtle experience sitting between the delusion of being one of the many and the reality. There are very many differences that really affected my life. I'm Italian. I come from the south of Italy, and I grew up in a economic environment where the south was considered like poor, almost retrograde, and and the north of the country, which benefited a lot from subsidies taken from taxation from the south to build the industry in the north, where it was closer to the markets, Central European markets. And I remember when I was, when I was finishing my university, to think, I am not going to live in the north of Italy because I would be a foreigner there. And I eventually ended up living in the UK as a foreigner, but paradoxically feeling less foreigner than in my own country. And as somebody else mentioned here, the Brexit thing, it really shook me. It really shook me because I had found a place where I thought I could really belong, where I didn't need to, I could feel at ease. And in reality, I found myself suddenly to be, again, a foreigner, a proper foreigner, a stranger almost, in a country that I thought was welcoming. So obviously, this is a much subtle, if you like, experience of feeling of the political implications on personal perceptions. So, and I've heard some of you talking about something which at face value is obviously much, much more traumatic quality. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. There are other little, in fact, not little, but quite substantial personal experiences related to mental health, not personal, but someone in my family where, discrimination clearly played a big role, not just societal discrimination, but also family discrimination. Yeah, so that's the bit I bring here today.
Okay, thank you. Joy, can you hear us? Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
I do apologise for not having my camera on. It keeps flashing every time I switch it on, and I haven't been able to work out why. So I've had to switch it off. I am one of these people who have actually become increasingly radical the more I've aged. I was brought up by a father who actually liked to think of himself as politically radical. In actual fact, he was a raging snob. And I was brought up in a sort of like a comfortable town, and my father had reached up from pretty poor working class roots to sort of like own his own home. My mother came from slightly better off shop owning stock, and one of the main things in my childhood were one of the main memories of my childhood were if he was on the losing side of an argument, I remember him turning around to my sister and me and saying, listen to your mother, she has to be right. After all, her family had a bathroom. That was usually followed up with, because they were massive football fans on opposite sides of the city. It was usually followed up with, and how many times have your lot won the cup then? So I must admit, apart from finding this amusing, I didn't think much of it as a child. And when I went away to university, there were quite a lot of people there who went to university locally and came from fairly comfortable backgrounds. And apart from the odd bit of radicalisation on some people's side, I didn't really think about it very much. I suppose I began to think differently when I went to teach in a socially deprived school, and realised that people were actually poor, and I hadn't really thought about that. That became very much more of a thing. When I left teaching and worked in criminal justice and drug and alcohol intervention, and really came across people who were really marginalised from society in a way I'd never even known. the Brexit thing. I mean, I frankly admit I've never got over it. It's not helped by the fact that I have a sister who I'm not particularly close to, and I'm almost convinced that she voted. I know my brother-in-law voted for Brexit, and I'm pretty sure she will have done as somebody who's pretty non-political and would have done what he did. And it's something I've never. And I know perfectly well my brother-in-law is as racist as they come as well, and I'm pretty sure my sister is. So I find myself very sort of like divorced from that, alienated from that. And the other thing that I have not, I've become increasingly unforgiving about is the death of the trade union movement, the dying of the trade union movement in this country. I have no time whatsoever for people who work while other people are striking, who undermine industrial action. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this in the context of being non-judgmental in my role as a counsellor, because I'm fully self-employed now, having given up paid work. And I find myself really struggling in terms of standing outside the person and the values they're coming across with. And as the years have gone by, I've become increasingly unforgiving and increasingly angry about what I perceive as the sort of values that are part of the way our society has become increasingly focused on the individual, trampling over everybody and basically bugger everybody else's needs. As long as I'm all right, I don't care who I hurt.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, and last, Jane, would you like to share? Jane, can you hear us? Or can you? Hello, Jane? Yeah. Okay. Let me see. So when she comes back, we could just ask her. And yeah. Okay, so yeah. So how do we, the term personal and political began as a slogan to express common beliefs amongst feminists. So Carol Hanisch was one of, was actually one of the feminists who coined this term, the personal and political. And she actually focused on men's oppression and the location of relationships in the political structures. So she talked about oppression from a power relationship. And for example, when there was abuse, domestic abuse and violence, she would relate it to the societal oppression. And therefore, that's how feminism really came into being, when they started to raise personal issues related to women, inequality, patriarchy. They even talked about the monarchy, democracy. Many of the political systems led to societal oppression for women. Betty Friedan also spoke about women feeling constrained and blamed it on the position of women in society. German Greer talked about the issue of intimacy. And so there were many of these feminists who came into being when so the personal became political when what was going on in the home was shared in the social environment and then was raised as a political issue. So our home became the politics of housework, childbearing, challenging family and family values, class hierarchy, experiences with racism. And we know that there was a women's suffrage movement. Women had the right to vote. And so therefore, we need to understand that the personal and political was coined as a term from the feminist movement. I would also like to say that the country I come from, at this moment, we very strongly believe in the plight of women and children in our country. We are a country of millions, and we are constantly dealing or grappling with the oppression of women, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, rape, in all, and we are dealing with class, creed, societal, these are our societal oppressions. And while the system tries to grapple, because we are a large multitude of people, it becomes next to impossible to really contain, the personal being political. And therefore, it's, I just thought that, this topic was very deeply meaningful for me, because there were aspects of my life where I did become political. But it was very interesting to hear each of you speak. And do you think there was something very common amongst each of your sharings? What was it?
For me, it was around belonging.
Yes, yes. Anyone else?
Well, oppression of different types.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there was something around identity too.
And was there something of the political system? Yes, identity. And was there a sense of security while talking amongst you?
Sorry, what's the question again?
Will you
Yes.
say that again, please?
Yeah, was there a sense of security in each of us while we were talking about us and our environments, which I found was common? Was there a sense of safety or unsafety? It could be in the psychological sense, the physical sense, the emotional sense.
I felt like I heard most people speak to Karen's theme of alienation and
yes,
feeling othered where they are, which speaks being unsafe.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. So that was something common that we shared today amongst each of us. The sense of belonging, oppression, identity, and a sense of alienation, which each of us have experienced, at different stages in our life. So all of you have a pen and paper? Yeah. I would like you to answer these questions, which I'm going to be putting up. And I will be giving you maybe 10 minutes. Yeah. So what personal issues on gender, religion, environment are being raised as political issues? Is there hope for resolution and greater autonomy? 10 years ago, what beliefs, assumptions did you hold around these issues, religion, environment? Was there a political awareness about them? In your adolescent years, what did you rebel or raise a hue and cry about? What influenced these ideas and beliefs in your mind? Where did it come from? And last, in your early childhood years, what did you sense, imagine, was told about family issues being political? What was its significance? Yes, so we will go to the next part and we will be coming back to these questions and we will be discussing, some of the questions that I've asked you. So the model that we are going to be working on is called the frame of reference. As we all know, Jackie Schiff, the Schiff family, talked about the frames of reference as the structure of associated responses, which integrate the various ego states and integrate them into an integrated form of structure and function. And the ego states are bound by a skin. However, the Schiff family talked about the frames of reference as a filter on reality and talked about discounting, redefining, overemphasis when we refer to the frame of reference. So they looked at it as a script, but Ian Stewart said script is part of frame of reference. The frame of reference has many composite parts of it. Script forms a part of it. And therefore, towards the end, we will look at the positive side of frame of reference, what it can do to us. So Jean Ilse Clark talked about the frame of reference as a composite of the decisions the child makes in responses to personal experiences within the family and culture. And she said that there were 4 parts. So here is the diagram on the frame of reference. So Jean Ilse Clark said, the frame of reference is how we perceive ourselves, others, and the world. That we filter elements that do not fit into this map we hold of the world. And she spoke of the part around it, which talked about pressures, change and pressures. She talked about philosophic change, technology change, cultural change, and the last was economic change, that they create pressures. And if you look at the diagram, they can shake our frame of reference, which is probably what happened to each of us as we went along in life. Like some of you talked about living in countries where, which was not a part of your identity. Some of you talked about moving from country to country and, trying to fit in. Some of us talked about, issues, which were important to us, but which we felt very uncomfortable with. So let's look at this frame of reference to identify with some of the sharings and answers you have written. The first is the open area. Now, this is the part which is right now in the here and now, the part of us right now as we are sitting. This is the part which is the open area. This is the part where we have access to information. And this information, what do we do with it? Do we alter it? Do we deflect it? So look at what you have written in your first question. What personal issues on gender, religion, environment that concern you are being raised as political issues? Is there hope for resolution and greater autonomy? Are these your political issues that you keenly observe, talk about, or remain silent? Yeah. Would anyone like to share? And I would also like to say, I would like to maintain confidentiality in what we share. Yeah. So I will begin by talking about in the open area right now. I do not feel a sense of autonomy because my government has turned nationalist, and we are keenly aware of the divide between religions. And that has promoted a great sense of insecurity, sadness. However, being aware and being conscious, having a consciousness about it is extremely important for myself, that I do not go on this path. Okay? However, I do not feel a sense of autonomy. Yeah. So the rights of men in terms of access to their children, yes, when there is divorce and separation. The cost of living crisis is a concern for folks' mental health and the prescription of medication for people who are suffering. Oh, wonderful. Yes, Helen, what would you like to say? You're on mute. Yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah, there. Right. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a pain in the arse to a lot of people, in that oh God. I think I live in a country now which is oppressive, divisive, unconcerned about the majority of the people who live here, who are bringing in laws that will further oppress us. And I have a real sense of hopelessness about any change, even if we get rid of the Conservative government and the Labour Party come in. I don't think they're going to be much better because they've swung to the right as well. So I'm feeling pretty hopeless about the future of this country, actually. I think Brexit was a gross act of self-harm and nothing's improved. It's getting worse, and nobody who has a platform really is saying, look, a lot of this is down to Brexit. We really fucked up, sorry, and we need to do something differently.
Okay, thank you.
So that's me. Oh, and the fact that I'm a woman and an old woman makes it even worse. You know, because as women, we are still oppressed.
Yeah. Yes, Karen?
I noticed it wasn't on there, but what I'm really kind of busy with at the moment is sort of racism and anti-racism and whiteness, and kind of looking at my own internalized racism and how can I be an ally? Am I an ally? And that's been very challenging and difficult work. And I have mixed feelings about it. I have, sometimes I feel hopeful, other times I feel powerless and hopeless. So it's kind of a mixture in sort of small group settings and on a personal level with other therapists and groups where we're talking about this. I feel like I'm starting to get some autonomy and some power, but in the bigger system, it feels much less so.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, I actually have Parkinson's disease, and I do a lot of my work with people who have serious chronic health conditions. especially degenerative in nature. It's quite a sort of niche thing. But certainly in terms of health issues in the UK and the way things are going with the NHS, the decline of the NHS, which I personally do believe it is a managed decline. I think that sense of autonomy has completely evaporated for a lot of people with serious medical health conditions. And I think it is a very political issue because it's how we as a society decide to help people and support people with serious medical conditions, or do we just abandon them? And unfortunately, very much in the work I do, in my own personal experience and in with the people I work with, there's a sense of abandonment. There's a sense, I work with a lot of people who feel like they're a burden on society. And that image has been projected onto them, and they've internalized it. And there is this sense, we're already dealing with a personal, almost political issue in terms of our own relationship with ourselves, let alone how we interact with wider society, because we've been programmed to think that we are a burden, we're a problem, we're an issue, we're a drain on society and society's resources. And we look at the state of the NHS now, where ambulance workers, doctors, nurses, they're all going on strike. I actually work with a lot of nurses and medical staff as well, and they're saying that a lot of them are saying they're not really going on strike because of the money. They're going on strike because of the pressures, the under-resourced and the lack of staff. And the NHS is basically falling apart in the UK. And that is a serious consequence for people with medical health conditions.
Right. Okay, so Linda has written the discounting of the care of the old in our society. Resonating with what Paul is saying too. Jackie has mentioned, I work within the NHS and I've been on strike with the nurses as a member of their union. Wow. Okay. We'll go to the next question, which I asked. Yeah. So 10 years ago, what beliefs, assumptions did you hold on gender, religion, environment? Was it very fervent for you? Was it very deeply concerning for you? And was there political awareness and being open for examination, where whatever you discussed, how was it? Was it as grave a situation? Was it highlighted, or was it relatively calm? What was it? Yeah. Did you feel so strongly as you are doing now, 10 years back? Yes, Helen?
Well, probably not. As I mentioned earlier, I'm getting more radical as I get older. But I've kind of been waging a one-woman war on boycotting various companies for years now, decades. And I think the only thing that's sort of become more foreground for me, although it was still important back then, is the environment. It's, we cannot, we should not ignore the crisis that is happening, and yet we still seem to have people who are denying that climate change is happening and it's having an effect. So it's sort of so the other stuff, the feminism's been with me forever, and the racism. When I was a teenager, it wasn't called gender issues, it was feminism. And the religion stuff, I suppose as I've got older, I've become more tolerant of people of faith and less tolerant of religions, because they seem to be the bit that does the damage.
Yeah, you're right. You're probably right. I would like someone else to share, Paolo. Okay, I will read out. Awareness has definitely increased. I recently, some of my clients brought to my fuller awareness the societal discriminations in terms of women's health, discrimination on neurodiverse people. But was this 10 years ago, or are you talking about now?
No, this is now. This is the awareness I didn't really have 10 years ago, and perhaps 10 years ago it wasn't.
So, yes.
The neurodiversity, certainly I know it was much worse than it is today. But women's health, I think, is part of the degradation of the social system, particularly the health system.
Yeah. So, Jackie, I have become much more aware over the last few years. I think it was astonishment that the USA elected Trump. I couldn't grasp how this happened. And this made me think more about this. Okay, 10 years ago, the election of Trump, interesting that it brought you to be becoming sensitized to political environments. Very interesting. Yeah. Yes, Catherine, would you like to share 10 years back?
It's coming up to my 10-year anniversary of starting my training as a psychotherapist. And so I was mainly doing the job that I was doing before, which was as a theatre maker. And 10 years ago, I was touring a one-woman show that was based, I suppose, largely on an abusive relationship I experienced at university. So the personal was completely political for me. And I saw my work, and still do see a lot of, I'm still involved in the theatre world in a more consulting capacity now, and see that as a huge way that my activism can be enacted. But interestingly, I'm kind of reflecting that in terms of empowerment, I feel that active much more in the individual relationships I have with my clients. It's easy to feel like that you're changing the world, touring a play and speaking to big rooms of people. But in terms of enacting change, in terms of making a difference for somebody and therefore for society at large, I've been reflecting a lot recently on I suppose the political act of therapy.
Okay. Anyone else would like to share? Sam? 10 years back, how were you?
Yeah, 10 years ago, for me, it would have been around, well, I just qualified, more or less, or yeah. I'm just really sitting with as a group. We talk about gender, environment, religion, race has been brought up as well. I'm feeling that 10 years ago there were very few voices, whereas now I can really hear the voices even within our community. So, I really, when Helen was talking in particular around, the older she gets, the more radical. For me, this feels like growth. Because 10 years ago, there was very, very little engagement, even within our community, even in our literature, in the TA literature. So, it's, I'm really aware with Brexit, and there is a real sense that there's very little autonomy, but in some ways, I'm feeling more autonomous because there is more allyship. There's more, there's a movement taking place.
Okay.
There's a political movement, and I'm just really welcoming it more than I would have been, say, 10 years ago. Even having this voice right now. So that's where I am.
Thank you. Romy, would you like to say something 10 years ago?
So 10 years ago, my kids, I have 3 kids who all have German names, German first names. And that was not a problem 10 years ago. And I certainly know that when Brexit first happened, I was like, oh, shit, I should have given them different names so they could have assimilated a bit better. Sorry, I was getting quite emotional there.
Okay, thank you. And we will go to, the adolescent years, right? What were these hot button issues that caused you to discuss, rebel, raise a hue and cry, or remain oppressed? Were there some experiences that came from early family, peers, social media? And the reason why I'm asking is adolescence is the time when political awareness, becomes, there's a lot of political awareness. There's a lot of thinking and talking amongst peers and a lot of questioning about who am I, identity, and how do I know I exist, or how do I know I'm going to exist? So do you have any memories of your adolescent years? Were you agitated? Were you angry? What was it? Were you passive? Were there some issues that were prominent at that time? Yes, Romy?
So I was saying earlier that the wall came down when I was 10. So in my adolescent years, I started going to church because that felt rebellious. My family history was very anti-church. The kind of government was very anti-church. But every Sunday morning, I was going to church, and that felt like quite a daring thing to do at the time.
Right. Yes. Linda, would you like to say something? Karen said, I was so restricted in my boarding school, I rebelled by becoming an atheist and hating my parents. Not very original. Yeah. Yes, Linda?
Well, I've recently been reunited with a teacher from my adolescence. So I'm now 72, and it was his 90th birthday. So a few of us went to see him, and he was relating to me how rebellious I was as an adolescent. And he was reminding me about how often I would rise up against authority, against being repressed. And it was really interesting because I don't see myself as political at all, and haven't as an adult woman. But it was interesting to be reminded that as a kid, I was feisty. I was rebelling. I led the first sit down rebellion that our school had ever had. In the playground, we were sitting there refusing to go into lessons. And I cannot remember why, but it must have had something to do with oppression, a fight against oppression.
Yes, of course. So Jane, are you there with us? Jane? Yeah, so Karen I was refusing as a prefect to use my power to punish the little ones. A bit of a sense of injustice. Yeah, you're very right. I think, so do you think during adolescence, the awakening of, issues that, did you become aware of societal issues at that time of your life, sense of injustice, and, peers would talk about, maybe oppression, or they would talk about what was going on in their family, which could be political issues. Yeah. Helen, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I think I got, a lot of my politics were built originally on rebellion against my stepfather. And I spent a lot of my adolescent years smoking, drinking, and having sex and doing things that I really shouldn't have been doing. And I think I got into politics through music as much as anything. Like there was a lot of protest songs around back then, which kind of informed me. And even though I went, and I went to grammar school as well, which is also quite an oppressive regime and gave me something else to rebel against. So my rebellion wasn't particularly, it was more personal than political. and the political stuff grew out of it.
Okay, all right. So, I mean, this is the area of medium influence, where we hold assumptions about ourselves and the world that come from early family settings. Something from our family evoked rebellion in us in our adolescent years. We realized that they had become, that they could be societal issues, and that we could raise a hue and cry with our peers. And therefore, we can remember them and bring them for examination. And the last is early childhood years. Our early childhood years, so if you look at this diagram, the frame of reference talks about the deepest layer, which became part of our identity. And there were many factors that contributed to our identity. So script was one part of it. But if you look at, there was race, there was birth, your family, religion, cultural influences, there was geography, community, history, decade, your sexuality, culture. So all these were part of our internal frame of reference, which we grew from. And this came largely from family experiences, 0 to 7 years. So in those early childhood years, what did you sense, imagine, was told to you about family issues being political? Was there historical significance? And what experiences of family remain deeply entrenched? Were you able to answer? For example, in my early years, we were in war. And I remember that was my first exposure to the country as a whole. There was war, and there were blackouts, and we had to remain silent. And many of my relatives were going to fight the war. So that was my first political exposure within family, that family was talking about politics and what was going on in the country. And it did deeply impact my sense of security. Yeah. So did you have some experiences, or was there a sense of political environment within your families? We talk about monarchy, we talk about oppression. What was it? Yes. Yes, Joy. You're on mute.
I'm hoping this camera behaves itself now.
Yeah.
Interestingly, oh no, it's playing up again. I'll just switch it off again. Sorry. Interestingly, as I say, despite the fact my sister appears to have reacted in the totally the opposite way to me over the years, what was quite accepted in our family, was that we listened to the news. And in fact, it was such a thing that when we sat down to tea after my father had come out of work, had come home from work, that we weren't even allowed to talk during it. You know, the fact is, the news was sacrosanct in our family. My father came home, listened to the news, expected us to listen to it again, do it as well, and we were expected to be silent during it. Not that I remember this, but I apparently followed people around who were visitors to the house at the age of 5 and tried to discuss things in the news, which they found very strange. um, and um, and the other thing about it, it was absolutely instilled into, as I say, I can't answer how my sister's developed over the years, but it was sort of instilled in us that you voted. You know, people had died for your right to vote, and basically you were irresponsible and antisocial if you didn't vote. And the other thing that does interest me, I wasn't aware of it being at all political. Two things, really. One, that despite my mother not having a firm political stance on things, my father used to joke that she voted for all three in a time, but not all at once. She was very heavily committed to amateur drama. And you're talking about the 1960s, when people reacted differently to things that we're much more open about now. There were quite a few people in her amateur drama who were in same-sex relationships, and I grew up with that as being absolutely something unquestionably that was part of the fabric of who people were. And it quite surprised me as I got older to discover not everybody felt like that. The other thing that I was not aware of being political, and I don't think it was ever intended to be, but now it's become very much more important politically. My mother had an absolute loathing of lying in any form. She could forgive an awful lot of things, but not lying. And I suppose, given the shape of our political landscape over the last few years, that's come very much to the fore. I can't abide. I become absolutely furious at the sort of like they're all as bad as each other and they all lie stance. That to me just doesn't roll at all. And given that there's been such a focus over the last few years on not only lying, but lying being accepted, I haven't realised how deeply that was entrenched in me. That you could forgive all sorts of wrongdoing, but not lying. And I hadn't realised how deeply that was entrenched in me until the last few years, really.
Okay. Thank you. Sam, the news was a theme, especially around the race relations. There was an emphasis to assimilate and split off parts of the culture to survive different environments. Only within the home was there a safety around culture. Step out in the front door, there was modeling. Okay. Yeah. Who else would like to, is there anything you would like to share? Was there, a geographic connotation, racial, religion connotation, which you might have experienced, and maybe part of your script as well? Yeah. Yes, Helen?
Definitely a geographical thing. I was born and brought up in Yorkshire, and that's significant to me. So I'm a northerner. There's definitely very much a north-south divide. And there's something a bit, it's sort of like Paul was talking about Liverpool, a really strong cultural identity about coming from Liverpool. And there's something about being a Yorkshire person also, we're supposed to be mean and everything. I was born in West Yorkshire and I live in North Yorkshire now. And interestingly, there is a prejudice against what they call Westies here in North Yorkshire, because we're all supposed to be thick racists. So there's definitely geographical stuff too that goes on for me. I'm kind of glad I wasn't born a southerner, which is a dreadful thing to say. I do have friends who are southerners, so I don't hold it against everybody. But definitely geographical, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So
I felt
it, yeah. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
no, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, it was definitely geographical because where I live is the southern part of India. We never felt the impact of war, but it was the northern part of India which had invasions. And so largely the southern part were much calmer, quieter people. But in the north of India, they're more aggressive because they've had to, they've had to contend with invasions, wars. And as in the keynote, she spoke about partition. Many of their families were divided because of partition, and that continues to impact them and with their aggressiveness. So there's a huge cultural divide between the north and south of India because of the physical invasions and lack of security. Yeah. Who else would like to go? Yeah. Okay, Romy says, we were taught that you can think your own thoughts and talk about these political ideas in your family, but outside you toe the party line. You never knew who would inform on you, and so speaking out was seen as dangerous to self and their loved ones. Very true. Yeah, very true. So that's happening in my country now. We don't talk about politics. Yeah, we don't, unless we are with the government. We don't talk about politics. Yeah.
That's really sad, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's a dangerous topic. Yeah. Paolo, you've been very quiet. You want to be saying something?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and I kind of realized how wrapped I was in my own little world as a child. I was observing somehow, I was aware of some wider movements that, of a political concern, if you like. But I was too wrapped up in my own little world. So I took a pretty schizoid position, self-reliant. I'll go my way, I'll do whatever I can, and not being aware really of the wider framework of reference, if you like. At that age was the only thing I remember very, very early when I was around 8, 9, I decided not to go to church anymore. I could see too much hypocrisy in there, and I said, okay, this is not where I belong. But then I decided to belong pretty much with my friends and just forget about the rest. And that continued for a long time until I went to uni, at which point I kind of had to wake up from having been asleep at the wheel to issues that were kind of coming up. But even in those years, there wasn't really much happening. I still was negotiating in my own things, and it took me actually a while. I've been a late bloomer in many aspects of my life, actually. So.
Okay, so we are going to be looking at the political frame of reference, which is part of your identity. And do you now think you have a frame of reference that embraces the personal is political? So I would like you to draw this out from all that you have shared from the 4 areas and write down some features of how politics influenced and shaped your personality. So I would like you to draw it out And then I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. And we can talk about, we are going to be then looking at the frame of reference is not just a, a framework that, is very tight or rigid and makes us distort reality or filter out reality. We can use the frame of reference as a solid framework for us to look at autonomy within our political system. And that is what we are going to be sharing in our breakout rooms. And how will that help you to build dialogues with people and family? How will you use your political awareness, your connection with politics, your influences, beliefs, and actions? How would you use it to build dialogues with people and family to build empowerment? So that's something we can think about in breakout rooms. But for now, if you look at all that you wrote out, you have a political frame of reference, which is a frame of reference that's part of your identity. So how would you describe yourself in these 4 areas? And I will give you some time to do that. Are there any questions on that? Yeah. So I will give you some time to work on it. It's just for you to understand that probably you've had influences that were politically connected, and now you do have a personality, but you have the open area, and let's look at that in the next part. So we've come to the last part of this workshop. I would like you to share some of your thoughts. From Linda, I might have to switch my camera off. Okay. Okay. Right, who would like to share, and what did this workshop mean for you? So I would like each of you to say something. Yeah. Maybe I'll begin with Karen.
I think what I'm sitting with is the challenge, to me personally, to move from that inner circle outwards. That's the personal challenge. The inner work's great, but how can I broaden my circle of influence and how I engage outwardly? So I think that's a really big one for me.
Okay, something for you to reflect on, right?
Yeah,
and take home with you, right? Linda?
Yeah, before my lunch comes, it hasn't quite come yet.
Yeah, yeah.
What I was reflecting on with Karen was that, in fact, I think the biggest influence for me, the biggest way I've been able to express my activism, if you like, is through the influences I've had on my children and on my 2 granddaughters.
Yes, wonderful.
They are so much more able to openly discuss politics and issues of the day because of the way that we as a family have supported them. So,
wow, wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great.
Yes, great. Yes. Jackie, I've enjoyed this workshop, and I'm leaving with thoughts about what I can change, and most importantly, support others to change their lives in my national health system work in child mental health. Thank you. Yes, Sam.
It's been a lovely reminder just how much the political appears in our work, And so I've really thoroughly enjoyed just being reminded just how much we're all part of different systems. We're all trying to find a way to exist and belong. And there's lots of fear, but there's a lot of compassion and courage as well. So I thank everyone for sharing their stories. I really do.
Thank you. Helen?
Okay, I've really enjoyed this. I was reminded when we're in break room that we can make changes on a micro level. It doesn't all have to be macro, you know, which I'd lose sight of sometimes because I'm so busy fighting big fights that I forget that I can do my bit, you know, with the people I know, and I do what I can, but maybe I could do more. Yes. And also, we also talked about how wonderful we are as women, and, you know, but that we can be great motivators for change. Sorry to you men who are here, but, you know, if we think about the suffragettes and the suffragists and stuff, we've got some power.
Thank you. Thank you. Catherine?
Zoom was having a moment there, sorry. I just echo the thanks, you know, for everyone sharing so candidly. It really helps to do what you were inviting us to do, to kind of broaden our frame of reference by listening, and allowing others to impact us. So I thank you all for that. And in our meeting room, we were kind of mulling over the possibility of enacting change. You know, that for me personally, a reflection is it enough to just kind of use it almost as self-care to be feeling like I'm being active, or does the outcome matter? So that was kind of a really big question that we left on, but one I'll leave you guys to chew on now.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah. Oop, there we go. That's the sound off. I've really enjoyed it. I've taken a lot from it. I think for me, I think of this topic, the personal and the political, in terms of more towards the personal as a personal journey.
Yeah.
Understanding how politics has affected me in my life. And sort of once I sort of with that growing understanding of the forces that have been exerted on me without my actually seeing them or even recognizing a lot of them over the time they've happened, that helps me to shift that frame of reference and so how I relate to other people. So for me, it's been more of a personal journey of my relationship with the politics and understanding how they've influenced me and how that's changed me. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Paulo?
Well, I would like to thank you all, guys, because between the keynotes this morning from Karen Minikin and this workshop here, I really feel shaken, really physically shaken. And I'm now looking, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? How do I direct all this energy? And I don't know the answer yet, but I hope I can find something more of an active way of shaking it beyond my one-to-one or one-to-few work with my clients. So
through your clients, for sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Romy?
Just want to echo what's already been said. It's been really lovely having the space and hearing from people talking about their experiences of oppression, talking about their experiences of changing the dialogue for themselves in the personal, but also on a much wider scale. And yeah, I'm up for continuing that conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie?
So I did put some thoughts in the chat, but it's been really interesting. It's made me even more determined, I think, in my work in the NHS to keep challenging medicalisation and of of trauma and distress, really, and to keep locating history and culture and everything that surrounds the young person in the assessment.
Okay, thank you. And Joy?
I've just typed something in chat for.
Sure.
I'm sorry. Basically, as soon as I was put in a breakout room, it gave me the message that my speakers weren't working, and now they are. So I don't quite know what was going on there. So I'm sorry if I inconvenienced anybody, but thank you, everybody who contributed. And thank you for running there. Thank you for running this workshop. I'm glad I chose it, and I got a lot out of it. Despite the technical problems I've had while I've been here.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for, having chosen my workshop. And I hope it has been enriching, food for thought, something to take away. And that's all we can think of our political situation right now. Thank you so much.